Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. Today we're looking at the history of the M16A2. The M16A2 has got a little bit of a sentimental value to me because this is the rifle that I qualified with and carried in my time in the military in the early 1990. And, it's also the last of the true battle rifles as far as the use of iron sights. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the M16A1. The M16A1 served from 1969 to 1982. Those were the years of production. However, the M16A1 would see service well into the 90s. In fact, they were seen quite a bit during Gulf War I, and the Air Force had them until probably even closer to into the mid-2000s. Where a lot of these M16A1s ended up was converted over into M16A2s with the Capco conversion kits, where basically they removed the entire upper receiver, kept the bolt carrier, kept the charging handle, replaced the fire control group with the burst mechanism and the newer A2 pistol grip, and they replaced the stock assembly and then converted them into M16A2s. In fact, we even saw Model 01s. The M16A1 would pretty much become obsolete with the adoption of the new NATO cartridge. In the late 1970s, NATO held another trial for a new NATO cartridge. Due to the fact that the 5.56 had seen service in Vietnam and had incredible results for as far as terminal performance and also the concept of the assault rifle, NATO wanted their own assault rifle cartridge. And they settled on the Belgian SS-109, or the M855 ball cartridge, which was a 62 grain full metal jacket projectile, and it had a steel penetrator core in the center. Now, this round here was particularly troublesome due to the fact that the way it was built, it was made of three components. It had the copper jacket, the lead core, and then it had the penetrator core. If the penetrator core was not properly centered, it would cause the round to be a flyer, and that affected the accuracy. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get into the M16A2. So after the NATO trials and that was adopted, the U.S. needed their own rifle that would fire that cartridge. Due to the fact that the M16A1 had a barrel twist that was 1 in 12, it would not stabilize the new cartridge, the new projectile. So they needed to go with the newer 1 in 7-inch twist, and that would be part of the new M16A2. In the early 1980s, the U.S. Marine Corps started off a new requirement for a rifle that would replace the M16A1, and that was headed by a gentleman named Lieutenant Colonel David Lutz. He was pretty much the Marine's voice in the new rifle. Now, the Marine Corps, what they did was they specified what they want, and then Colt would provide what they wanted. And there was two key people at Colt as well. Mr. Rob Roy, who this gentleman was probably the M16 ambassador for Colt throughout the world. He had been in Vietnam multiple times. He had often gone to shows and showed the new products. He was the driver behind a lot of Colt's new products. He was really Mr. M16, right up through the mid '80s. And the next gentleman was Harold Waterman. Harold Waterman was a close friend of mine, just an incredible gentleman. He had also worked on the M60 program for the U.S. military while at Springfield Armory. Harold also had multiple patents for the M16A2 as well. And that group of three were pretty much the center of the M16A2 development. So the initial weapon was referred to as the M16A1E1. That was a prototype. Now the rifle that we have here is a Colt AR-15A2 type rifle. Now, we don't have access to a real M16A2 burst mechanism, which is not really relevant to this anyways, but all the changes that we're going to be seeing can be seen on this rifle as well. The XM16A1E1 was basically the M16A1 lower receiver with a modified upper. What we're going to do is we're going to go over the M16A2 from back to front, and we're going to go over each of the changes and why. There was basically 14 changes that were required by the Marine Corps. So we're going to start from the rear. First off, we're going to look at the buttstock. The buttstock was improved from the material of the M16A1. It's 5/8 of an inch longer. It's a glass foam-filled nylon, which was significantly stronger than that of the original material. The next is the new butt plate. As you can see, we have much more aggressive checkering so it wouldn't slide. And the other change was to the latch here. This latch here can be actuated by your thumb rather than have to use a tool. Of course, inside here you have your cleaning kit. But this was much easier for a soldier to get to their cleaning kit not having to use any kind of a tool. So looking at the lower receiver now, we have a new pistol grip, which we have also another different material, much stronger than that, and we have the thumb swell. The lower receiver was also strengthened. As you can see, the area right in here where the receiver extension goes into the receiver extension tube. And then we have the area up in the front here, which is the front pivot pin area, which more material was added here to strengthen these two areas. The next was one of the most controversial aspects of it was the 3-shot burst limiter. I personally think this was the biggest mistake ever, and it was probably one of the worst things inflicted on the U.S. infantrymen. According to Lieutenant Colonel Lutz, it was a compromise between full automatic and ammo conservation. Now, quite frankly, the three-shot burst mechanism defeated the purpose of the M16's original development. During the early days of the Vietnam War, our troops armed with the M14s were completely outgunned by the guys with the AK-47s in media engagements. Media engagement is basically an ambush, and the only way you get out of an ambush is to lay down a heavier volume of fire in a more concentrated area to take out the enemy. Well, with our troops armed with semi-automatic M14s, when they heard the AK-47s going off with the selective fire 30-round magazines, they basically hit the dust because their perception of their fire was ineffective. They felt they were outgunned, so very few people would return fire because, quite frankly, when you're being in an ambush with a high volume of fire, you don't have time to try and pick out your one shot, one kill. It just doesn't work. Once the M16A1 and M16 were adopted with a fully automatic, our soldiers were able to compete with that and often overwhelm them because the M16 was even that much more controllable than the AK-47 was on full auto fire, meaning you can get more accurate saturation of where the firepower was. So by going to the three-shot burst, you completely decrease the firepower on the individual and especially on the unit level. And the other controversial aspect was the mechanism itself. The burst mechanism had a burst cam which had 6 notches. You had two shallow notches, which when you fire your first shot, the cam would rotate. Fire the second shot, it would rotate. On the third shot, the disconnector would fall into the deep notch, and the deep notch disconnector would grab a hold of the hammer and it would stop the cycle. Then when you release the trigger, the cycle would start all over again. Well, the problem with that was it did not reset. If you were, say, to fire one shot, so you fired off one shot, the cam rotates and you're on to your next shot and the bolt locks back on the last round and you reload and you pull the trigger again, there's memory. So basically when you pull the trigger, it's going to fire the second shot, third shot, and it's going to stop. So it didn't reset. So quite frankly, you never knew how many rounds was going to go off when you pulled the trigger. So the mechanism was pretty much horrible also. Not to mention the fact that during testing, because Colt had done testing with burst mechanisms, and so did Stoner, they found that the optimal burst was 6 rounds. Because when you have 3, bang, 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 up, and then by the time you on your fourth and fifth, you go back down. So your ideal was 6 rounds to be accurate on target. It wasn't even 3. So it was a complete cluster. We're going to be hearing in Gene Stoner's own words, as we have in the title, what he thought of the burst mechanism. In fact, what he thought of the entire M16A2 program. So we're going to leave that to him. But the burst mechanism, in my opinion, was a complete cluster. It took away the concept of what the rifle was there for to begin with, and it's something that we would revisit in the global war on terror with the replacement of the M4 with the M4A1, which the M4 had 3-shot burst, and the M4A1 we went back to full auto. Finally got rid of that burst mechanism. It was just awful. So looking at the upper receiver, as you can see here, we have what's referred to as a fire cartridge case deflector, or the Brunton bump. Lieutenant Colonel Lutz would recall that as being a left-handed shooter, he used to get hit in the face quite a bit with fire cartridge cases, because a properly gassed M16 rifle will throw the cartridge cases back, so you would get hit in the face with them. So he had gone to Rock Island Arsenal and talked with a gentleman named Loren Brunton about the issue. And Loren Brunton was the M16 project manager at Rock Island Arsenal. And he had said he had already thought of that and he had a solution. So basically what he had was something very similar to this that was put on with basically an epoxy or type tape that would stick to the side of the receiver. And the cartridge would come back, it would strike the fire cartridge case deflector, it would bounce forward, or it would hit here and it would cause it to go way away from the shooter's face. And Loren Brunton has a patent on this fire cartridge case deflector, so that was added onto the rifle to take care of that issue. And that will be seen forever on the new rifles, as well as the M4, M4A1s, M16A4s. This proved to be a very, very good enhancement to the rifle. The next area was the rear sight. Now, this is something else, in my opinion, was done more for Marine Corps lure and their marksman, their lone marksmanship program. They basically turned the M16A2 into a target rifle rather than that of a combat rifle. Because as you'll hear from Gene Stoner, that he had offered all of this on the original AR-15, but the Army said they didn't want it. For instance, the adjustable windage. The Army did not want that due to the fact that they didn't want soldiers being able to fidget. Your hands fidget, you rotate knobs and everything. What that will do is that would remove the zero of the rifle in combat, and you don't want that. The Army wanted to be able to set it to your mechanical zero and just leave it there. That's when they came up with the windage drum, which required a use of a bullet tip to rotate. That was wanted. Now, if you look at this rear sight came from a prototype rifle that was developed by a gentleman named Hank Tatro. It was the Colt light machine gun. It was originally the open bolt. It was a prototype that Lieutenant Colonel Lutz saw in Colt's gunroom, and one of the prototypes. Now, if you look at the windage drum here, this windage drum comes from the original AR-10s. We can see from the photograph of the AR-10 sight, you have the same kind of a dial that was used on there. So you had two apertures. You had a large aperture, which is 0 to 200 meters, and you had your standard aperture, which is used out to 800 meters. This rear sight windage would adjust the rear sight up to 800 meters. Now, at 800 meters, you are not going to see a human target, so basically it was an area target, which was totally impractical. This was designed specifically for the Marine Corps to go out there and qualify in their precision shooting, which had no bearing on real combat. This rifle was designed for out to 300 to 400 yards. The original field sight did it and pretty much did it better because it was practical, it was simple, and it was effective. This was expensive. On the original rifles, this cost close to $60 to have this rear sight. And I can tell you, in the Army, we were never trained how to use this. We did a battle sight 0 on it, and we left it there because you're not going to engage targets at that distance. In fact, it's hard to even see a human being beyond 300 yards, 400 yards. So this whole thing turned the rifle into a target rifle for the Marines on their rifle ranges than it did anything for combat. So I felt that this was a mistake. If you look at the Canadian C7, the Canadians got it right. They took all the best features of the M16A2 and made some changes to build a proper battle rifle, which basically was the same rifle you see here with the M16A1 field sight, and they didn't have that burst mechanism. They kept it on full auto. So now we're going to move forward. They replaced the standard slip ring with a delta ring. The delta ring is canted, which made it much, much easier for the soldier to be able to pull the slip ring back to be able to remove the handguards. The next was probably one of the best improvements they did was the two-piece handguard, upper and lower handguard. Now, these are interchangeable handguards, so there's no top or bottom. They work either way, unlike the original M16s and A1s where you had a left and a right. The M16A1s, often you had to replace the right handguard because what happened was during your drill and ceremonies, the rifle would often be dropped on the right side and the handguard would hit the concrete and it would crack. So they were always replacing right handguards on those things. So this got rid of having to have two separate part numbers to have one part number that was made of a more durable material. And it was also easier to grip. Now, I have to say, personally, I like the feel of the grips of the M16A1 a lot better. I like the way that it fits in my hand a little bit better, but this is a far more practical application. The next is the barrel. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the M16A1 barrel, and we're going to take a look at the M16A2 barrel. As we can see, the contour of these barrels is just a little bit different. If you look at under the handguards, this is the M16A1 on top. The dimensions under the handguards are identical. But if we look from the front sight tower forward, we can see this is thicker. Now, the reasoning given for increasing that thickness was to increase the strength so when paratroopers would land on the muzzles, the barrels wouldn't bend, which really was ridiculous. That was completely asinine. They basically added weight to it for no gain. This does not increase anything for as far as durability or reliability or longevity. The area back here behind the front sight base is where the barrel will overheat and where the barrel will blow. And this area back here, generally on the left-hand side. As you can see, these are the exact same thickness here. So both of these barrels, for as far as doing a destruction test, will both burst at the exact same place in the exact same time with the exact same round counts. So there was no increase in anything other than adding some weight to the end of the rifle. The next thing to change was the flash suppressor. The M16A1 had what's referred to as a birdcage flash suppressor, which you had radials went all the way around to disperse flash at night, so it would decrease the signature significantly. The M16A2 went to what's referred to as a compensator. They left the bottom solid, and they had the radials on top. What this was supposed to do was supposed to aid in recoil reduction for muzzle rise, which is non-existent. And two was to contain the blast from the bottom. So if you were to say you were going to have debris in the bottom here, the muzzle blast wouldn't go down and blow debris up. Where this one here, you would have blast going 360 degrees. This one here would only be, on the top. So it theoretically would not blow up any kind of debris. So now we want to talk a little bit more about the barrel itself. The barrel had to be changed due to the fact that of the new M855 cartridge. The original M16A1 had a 1 in 12 inch twist barrel, or one revolution every 12 inches, and that was used to stabilize the 55 grain full metal jacket. Now, if we go back earlier in the history of the M16, the original barrel was 1 in 14 inch twist, and it was a very destructive bullet once it hit a human target. Well, during the development of the M16 rifle, AR-15 rifle, it was found that during its use in extreme cold conditions, the M196 tracer would not stabilize properly in the much heavier air of the cold environment. So they had to switch to a 1 in 12 to speed that up so it would shoot in all weather conditions the M196 tracer. Well, with the adoption of the M855 cartridge, or the SS109 cartridge, a 62 grain projectile, you had to increase the rifling twist to stabilize the heavier bullet. So they went to a 1 in 7 inch twist. Now, many of you are familiar with the 1 in 9. The 1 in 9 is ideal for the 62 grain M855 round. Well, why don't we have a 1 in 7? Well, it was the exact same thing, the M856 tracer. The M856 tracer would not stabilize well in the cold environment, so they had to increase the rifling twist so it would take the M855 tracer. So it was the same thing. The optimal one for the actual battle round had to be changed to accommodate the tracers. And also the Belgians, who used this round initially, used a 1 in 7 in their machine gun round. And their machine guns are their M249 or their minimes. So that brings us to a little bit more interest in this round. When the original Colt M16A1E1 and M16A2s went into production, the M855 or XM855 ammunition was sent to Colt. And they found with some of the initial production rifles that they couldn't meet the accuracy requirements with the XM855. Yet they would put M193 in there. The rifles would they had, one MOA or just a little bit larger groups. And it was found that due to the fact the way the ammunition was manufactured, those steel penetrator cores were not centered properly, and it was causing all kinds of flyers. So the ammunition, which was initially designed for a machine gun, not for a rifle, was causing accuracy issues with the rifle. They had to do some refinements in the production of the M855 ammunition to correct that problem. And still to this day, the M855 has caused issues with accuracy. It's caused a lot of terminal issues for as far as the way the bullet would perform on tissue. It was varied from lot to lot. It was very much a problematic round, and it was later in the global war on terror would be replaced by the M855A1, but that's a whole different situation. It's a whole different generation of rifles. The last real change we notice on here is the front sight post. The front sight post was changed to a square. Now, according to Dave Lutz, they felt that the square, sharp edges was much more precision for the Marine to be able to hit their targets with it. It was a much crisper sight picture. That's debatable. You see that one go either way, and quite frankly, myself, I prefer the Damaco one, which is a round front sight post, but it's a much narrower front sight post. But this square front sight post would carry over to the M4 and still be what we use today. Now, according to Lieutenant Colonel Lutz, this was a $1.3 million contract to produce the new M16A2. They completed it in 33 months. On November 20th, 1983, the M16A2 was adopted by the U.S. government. Well, actually adopted by the U.S. Marine Corps. In contracts 1 and 2, it was $522 per rifle. The third contract was $495 per rifle, and the fourth contract was $455 per rifle. In August 1985, the U.S. Army had adopted the M16A2. Now, in September of 1988, there was a contract bidding war between Colt and FN for the M16A2 contract. This was the first time Colt would lose an M16 contract to any other company. FN was awarded the contract for $420 per rifle. FN would go on to make most of the M16A2 rifles. And also, when it would come to the M4, Colt would have their M4 sole source up until around 2004, 2005, that time period. I'm not sure exactly what the dates were on that. And then FN would take that contract from Colt as well after Colt had the sole source. And FN would go on to produce not only the M16A2, the A4, the M4, M4A1, M249, and M240 machine guns. All of our infantry rifles, with the exception of the handgun, they would go on to manufacture. So here's something very, very interesting. What did Stoner think? Well, in an interview that Gene Stoner did with the late Edward Azell, he had given his thoughts on exactly what he thought of the M16A2. So we're going to take a look at that now.
Were very emphatic on sights that were easy to adjust. They said that their experience, and these were all combat experienced officers in this infantry board, said that they absolutely didn't want any type of quick adjustable sights on any combat rifle. They said, as an example, the M1, which has a marvelous set of sights on it, was probably the best rifle sight they ever saw for shooting at Camp Perry and rifle matches, and the worst one they ever saw for combat usage. And the reason for it was the fact that nervous fingers tend to twist dials and knobs, and in a combat situation was the last place in the world you ever wanted to change the zero on a rifle. You wanted to leave it alone because there's no way to do it in combat. And they had found, all these officers found, and they were unanimous in this opinion, that there was a lot of trouble with the sights on the M1 in actual combat use. So they wanted a fixed sight, and I talked them out of that and said that there should be a sight put on there that could be adjusted with some difficulty, but just zero it in and don't ever make an attempt to change it in combat. So this became I think, a very poor choice. I know how it got there, because the people in charge at the time were all what we call team shooters or target shooters. And they decided this was an excellent opportunity to make the weapon more of a target rifle rather than a combat rifle.
The M16, of course, has a lot longer association in life since you let go of it as a design than when you actually were in control of it. What does it feel like as a designer to sort of cast your child off into the unmerciful clutches of the people who manufacture it and sort of take it from there?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I one time or the other tried to get back in and make some contribution, to the weapon, and it turned out to be rather a fruitless thing. I was told that, for instance, I wanted at one time, due to some field problems they had, to go in, and I suggested to the Army how to make the weapon a little better, and particularly in corrosion-resistant materials. And they said, well, that's real nice, and they would think about it. And so they got back with me and said, this is going to cost $5 or $6 more to make the weapon corrosion resistant, and we don't feel that it's cost effective to do such a thing. And I said, well, this is no consideration to the man in the field that's trying to stay alive with it. And they said, no, but that had nothing to do with it. It was the cost effectiveness that guided these things. And with that kind of a answer, I just kind of threw up my hands and said there's not much one can offer as far as redesign or contributions to the thing. But materials do change, and when these new materials come along, you'd like to be able to, I think, introduce them into something that, this is important as this. I think on this A2, this handguard arrangement is an excellent improvement, because the fact that it gets down to one molding that does the work of two. And I think that was a good idea. I think one thing that might be of interest to you, after this product improvement model was approved by the Marine Corps, they asked me to come up and take a look at it and gave me a briefing on it. And I commented on it quite frankly, and it wasn't exact. And they also gave me the report, and I wasn't too impressed with some of the things that they did, and I told them so. And then right after that, the Commandant of the Marine Corps asked me to come up and personally tell him what I thought, and I told him what my thoughts were, and he thanked me very much and said, well, I realize where you're coming from, but on the other hand, the Marines did all this, and therefore they feel like it's more their baby. And even though that some of these so-called improvements you doubt, it might be better from a morale standpoint and all just to leave it alone. And I said, well, you are a better judge than I am on that, and if you think so, I said, fine, but I said some of these things, it's just a pity to work so hard on an original design to make it light and then turn around and arbitrarily put weight on the weapon and everything for no other reason than it feels better and shoots a little straighter on a rifle range competitive shoot. It has nothing to do with the combat effectiveness. The fact is it's subtracting from it by making the weapon more heavy. And we discussed the burst limiter, and I said to me, it was absolutely ridiculous, and told them why. I said, with the experience that we had in Vietnam, for instance, all the original weapons had 20-round magazines, such as you see here. And in Vietnam, we found out that when the troops came up against the AK-47, which had a 30-round magazine, they felt like they were outgunned and all started writing home to their congressman and demanding that they have more magazine capacity. And Colt immediately had to tool up and come up with a 30-round magazine because it became a morale problem, not a moral problem, but a morale problem. And I see the same thing with your burst limiter. I told him, I said, the first time the troops come up in the field and they fire a 3-round burst and the enemy shoots 30-round burst at them, they're going to feel like they're completely outgunned, and we're going to go through the same routine again. The commandant said, well, I've considered that, but he says with a pair of long-nosed pliers we can fix this situation and take the 3-round burst limiter out and everybody will be happy, and that'll be a field fix. So, those were my general comments on what had been done, and like I say, some of these things I approve of, and some of them I think that they have nothing to do with making the effectiveness of the weapon change.
Well, as we see, Gene Stoner was very, very critical on the M16A2 because, again, a lot of things that you see on this, he had already thought of. And, you know, he basically felt that this was not that much of a product improvement. He loved the new materials, but the burst, of course, was ridiculous. The rear sight, as I said, he offered it, and the Army said no. Because, again, if this was an Army project, I don't believe that A2 sight ever would have come up. The Army would never have developed this rear sight. This was strictly done by the Marine Corps. And for as far as the heavy weight on the barrel, I guess I'd be surprised if they would have done that too, because it doesn't really do anything for the rifle. But again, the materials of the stock. Now, the stock, that would be an interesting, as later times would go on, when we would start using more body armor, when that stock would be longer and more difficult to use. Now, something else I want to put in here just for fun is we all know what my thoughts are on the forward assist. I am not a fan of the forward assist, never been, and Gene Stoner was not either. So he testified in the I-4 congressional hearing that he felt that it was unneeded. The Army put it there, and it was not necessary. So here's a video of Gene Stoner test firing the M16A2, and we can see what his thoughts are of the forward assist.
Just exactly the wrong number of rounds.
Exactly.
We figured this out scientifically, that gets you just as far away from the target as you ever get is in 3 shots. If you shot 5, you'd be back on again, or 4.
So as we can see, his mockery of the forward assist. So I just want to throw that in there because that was hilarious. Now, the M16A2, as I said, it's very sort of special to me because it is what I trained on. Actually, it's sort of funny. When we qualified BRM, I actually got marksman, and this is why. Well, what happened with me in my first shot at BRM was this was Steamy, Georgia in July. I wore glasses back then, which I do now too, but I had laser. It's all different story. But we got down, and as the first and second target came up, my glasses completely fogged. I was trying to shoot and wipe my glasses down and shoot and wipe my glasses down. I probably got like 20 out of 40 at best. Well, then the drill sergeants came down to all of us with glasses, and they gave a chemical to wipe on there, and it was a defogger. So my second time, I had no problem, and I shot 3 out of 40. Now, as you know, 38 out of 40 is expert. Being it was my second try, I had to get marksman. And believe it or not, I even had a malfunction during that my second try also. And even with a malfunction, I still got 38 out of 40. But it doesn't count. They don't care what the reason is. If your rifle malfunctions and that causes you to lose, they don't care. If wherever you qualify on the first, that's what it is. So that sort of sucked. But after we qualified BRM, they took away our M16A2s and gave us M16A1s to complete training with. So the M16A1 that I had was, God probably saw the fall of Saigon. It was old, but you know what? The thing still worked. But the M16A2 was the last basic iron sight rifle that we had. It was a very reliable rifle. It had a lot of awesome improvements, but it had its problems too. Like I said, the burst mechanism was horrible. The rear sight was just not necessary. It wasn't used. The rifle was really designed for the Marine qualification targets and qualification series, and not really for combat. And it would add a lot of cost, which most soldiers wouldn't even use that rear sight. For as far as the barrel was concerned, with the heavy end, it added weight. Did it hurt anything? No, not really. But you're adding a lot of weight to a rifle that was originally designed to be lightweight. But overall, this was an excellent service rifle. It served well into Gulf War II, Global War on Terror. Many reserve units still had these. National Guard units still had these. And it would take quite some time for even the M16A4 to replace it, as well as then the M4 would replace the M16A4 and A2. So I do hope you enjoyed this video. I really was happy to be able to put in what would Stoner do? Did Stoner think? It was interesting hearing from his own words what he thought of what they did to his baby. And of course, he didn't have no say in it. The Commandant of the Marine Corps just asked him afterwards. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, and even better, share.